and today's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Milliman? We don't see her online, so she's absent. Commissioner Maury Bidu?
Present.
Commissioner Petrillo? He's probably not present as well. Commissioner Podar? Not present. Commissioner Wellner?
Present.
Commissioner Will?
Present.
Vice Chair Dye? Absent. Chair Lockwood?
Present.
We do have a quorum.
Vice Chair Dye does show up on the panel.
Oh, okay. So then that would be 6 present. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. So let's go ahead with our director's report from Erin Wardell.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. My name is Erin Wardell. I am the Interim Planning and Development Services Manager. As you all know, Andy Back retired in August, and so I've been serving in the interim role since then, and I will stay as the interim until we've appointed a permanent Planning and Development Services Manager. So for this meeting and next meetings, until that happens, I'll be serving in the director role. As you can see, we are testing our auditorium today for hybrid meeting purposes. This is something that the board has recently moved towards. All board members were present on Tuesday for the board meeting, for example. So it might look a little bit different, and it's possible we'll have some technology or audio issues happening today. It's all part of a testing process. So please let us know if you're having trouble hearing or if something is not working. And it's all lessons that we'll learn and try to fix going forward into the future. And we will talk about this a little bit later on the agenda as well and find out more from all of you what you think about possibilities for how to run these meetings going forward. I do want to acknowledge that it's National Community Planning Month. The board made the proclamation at their meeting yesterday, and you can see my jazzy APA background that our communications staff put together. Part of recognizing National Community Planning Month is recognizing all of our planning commissioners and the work that you do to support our community. So the Board of Commissioners stated their support for all of your work and their appreciation for the time that you put into this. And we as county staff thank you, of course, as well. So thank you for your service here. As noted in the email sent to the Planning Commission last week, the county's web redesign has gone forward, fitting in with all these other changes we have going on. We now have a redesigned website. You may find that you are looking for something and it's difficult to find because it's been reorganized. Please give us a call, reach out by email if you can't find something. We probably can't find it either, but we will help you. And we are working with our IT department to fix things as we're identifying these problems. So it's been an interesting process to transition to a new website, but I think we're definitely moving in a positive direction to make a more user-friendly website. So once we resolve these issues, I think it'll serve a great function for our community. We also have changed our email signatures or our email addresses, you'll notice. So Washington County's website has changed to the new domain. Our emails now mimic that as well. The previous website and our previous emails all still work. They reroute, so don't worry that you're not reaching us if you're using our old email address. It is getting to us, but we'll be updating over time. Vice Chair Dye, I saw your hand went up. Go ahead.
You're muted.
Of course I am. Sorry, everyone. So I was on the website looking and I was like, oh, this looks new and fresh. And then I was clicking through things. And of course, I went to visit meetings, agendas, and more for meeting days and times. And it said access denied. So I'm sure that's just one of the little snafus. You're sending people somewhere and there's no access to actually see the things. But appreciate the new design.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that's happening right now as we update some of the links. And sometimes if you Google something that you know is on the county's webpage, it may pull up the old link and you'll get that access denied message. When you're looking for meeting agendas, you'll want to make sure that you're in the county's iAgenda page, which is where you would go to see board agendas as well. The Planning Commission is now there. Another thing we're transitioning to is iAgenda. It's another thing for us to all learn, and it's going to be different, but it is a pretty powerful tool, and it's very easy to search archives. And so I think it's a positive change, but again, something for all of us to learn. If you are finding that access is denied for something you're looking for, again, send us an email and we'll get it in the queue for IT to fix. So just let us know. I think that covered all of my notes of things that are changing that we wanted to call attention to for right now. I'm going to move into giving a couple of updates on some ordinances that are already in the process. Since you haven't met since mid-July, many of these things have happened over the past couple of months. So in August, at their hearing, the board voted to continue the hearing on A engrossed ordinance number 882, the amendment of the transportation system plan to include the tile flat road extension, to the January 24th, 2023 hearing. The purpose of continuing it to that date was to allow Metro Council to finish their decision-making process on whether or not to expand the urban growth boundary to encompass Tigard's River Terrace 2.0 planning area. So the board felt most comfortable waiting for the Metro process to finish before they took action on that ordinance. So we'll be back before them on January 24th. And we will give you an update on Metro's process as well when we know how that's going to turn out. We thought that they would take action by the end of this year, but it looks like they've pushed out their timeline to January. So we'll see how these dates end up lining up. On another topic, the board decided not to refer to the November general election a temporary moratorium on psilocybin services. That's the psychedelic mushrooms. That's the ballot measure that Oregon voters approved to legalize through Measure 109 in 2020. So the board is not going to be referring that. The board will hold a work session on the status of the 21-22 long-range planning work program on October 18th. So that might be something you're interested in hearing about or listening into the board's discussion about it. And then also on October 18th, the board will continue their deliberations on ordinance number 883, which is the proposed transportation system plan amendment for the Cornelius Pass Road extension. So a lot of things happening up at the board level. For your meeting today, we have 3 work session topics. The first will be an update on significant natural resources. The second will be an update on new state rules regarding climate-friendly and equitable communities. And then we will be having a discussion about future work session topics and then also potential of moving towards hybrid meetings. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that could look like. For your upcoming Planning Commission meetings, for the October 19th evening meeting, you'll have a first hearing on ordinance number 889, which is minor amendment to the Community Development Code. And for your November 2nd day meeting, you will have your first hearing on ordinance number 890, middle housing land divisions. And that would also be an amendment to the CDC to implement Senate Bill 458. So that was a lot of information covering a lot of different topics. We will be circling back to a few of these during the meeting, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out or raise your hand now.
Any commissioner have a question or comment? Commissioner Pacillo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The psilocybin, I'm not going to pronounce the psilocybin. What is what is the implications of it not being referred? Or what's the intent and implications?
So I'll jump in here a little bit. The board discussed whether or not they should refer to the voters, delaying implementation of the psilocybin provisions until the state rulemaking was done and we could develop some local time, place, and manner regulations similar to what we did with the marijuana regulations. Because without that, what will happen is that come early January, the state will be able to start issuing licenses. And the rulemaking is still underway, so we don't know all of the parameters of what the rules will allow or require. But the board determined they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to delay implementation, and they wanted to just have staff move forward when we do get requests. We'll be looking at what similar uses there are to the psilocybin service centers and growing, and address them in a similar way. So we
the
won't be delaying implementation.
And the implications are that it would, there would, is it something being put on hold or just allowing to proceed, or?
So if this had been referred to the voters, it was to put it on hold. And now without doing that, we won't be putting them on hold. So we will be moving forward under the state's permitting process.
Okay, thank you.
And this is an item, though, that we have as a possible work session, because we may be coming forward once the rulemaking is done with some regulations. So when we get to that part of the agenda, we can talk a little bit more about whether you want to hear more about it.
Great,
Great.
thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any hands up,
Well,
so.
are we going into
Did I
it
miss?
yet? I'm sorry, I have a second one. It's
Okay.
It's a question for staff regarding future business, which is Commissioner Wellner and I's term will be up January, something like that. And are there plans in the works to recruit and get people approved so that we're planning commission's not down 2 people for a period of time, long period of time?
Yes, Commissioner Petrillo, I can answer that for you. This is Todd Borkowitz. So the county does a quarterly recruitment, and those positions are advertised within that recruitment. I believe it is out right now, but I'm sorry, I don't have the date of when it went out or when it goes till. But we'll be accepting applications up until the board kind of takes that up. So.
And if you do
Well, I
have,
guess my question is, wait a second. My question is more specific. Is the board taking it up, or when is it supposed to take it up? In the past, we've had some instances, particularly when it was post-election and there were some delays or some considerations, and it went for months before, maybe even almost a year before there was a placement. I'm just wondering if it's on the board's agenda, and if it's not, I'd like to request that it be put on the board's agenda in terms of what the staff does to suggest, what's pending.
I don't believe that we have it scheduled at this time, but normally it would be in November.
Okay.
So we will work to get that, make sure it is on the agenda. And on the recruitment side of it, if any planning commission members do have people they think might be good on the planning commission, please feel free to forward there's a link we can even send out with the electronic application process for applying for the planning commission. So we're definitely open to that, and the recruitment is still open at this point.
Chair, I hate to go one more time, but did I miss the conversation about in-person meeting scheduled for next time? Is that correct?
So that discussion is on after the work session items. We have a short PowerPoint with some
Great.
options to discuss with the PC.
Thank you. Sorry. That's all.
Just want to note that Stacy Milliman joined the call.
If there are no more questions regarding the director's report, I think we're ready to move on to our next item. Thank you very much for that. The next item is oral communications. if we have anyone signed up to speak to us about something not on the agenda.
Chair Lockwood, at this time, we do not have anyone signed up for oral communications.
Thank you. And let's go ahead to our work session. Starting with significant natural resources update, I think.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. There's Michelle. Michelle Miller will give the presentation. Michelle, you're muted.
Gosh, sorry about that. Let me start again. Good afternoon, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. I'm Michelle Miller, Senior Planner in Community Planning Group within the Long Range Planning section. Today's presentation is an update on the county's response to the Land Use Board of Appeals remand of the county's significant natural resource regulations. Next slide. Today, I'll give a very brief recap of our natural resource regulations as part of the Goal 5 program. We'll review the Land Use Board of Appeals remand of A engrossed ordinance number 869. Then I will update you on the work sessions we've had with the Board of County Commissioners back in July and the direction they gave us in response to the remand. And finally, the next steps and timeline for how this will all fit together to address the remand. Next slide. It's been a few months since we've talked about natural resources, so I wanted to give you a bit of a refresher. Natural resources fall under statewide planning Goal 5. Goal 5 requires local jurisdictions identify resources and follow a series of steps to establish policies and rules for either protecting or limiting the impacts to the inventoried natural resources. The county completed its Goal 5 process in the early 1980s under the original Goal 5 Oregon Administrative Rules, and then this program was acknowledged. Then the state OARs changed, and one of the changes to the rules gave Metro the authority to plan for fish and wildlife habitat protection on a regional level, resulting in adoption of Title 13 of the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, known as Nature in the Neighborhoods. And it gave local jurisdictions some options for complying with these regulations. The county and its regional partners developed the Tualatin Basin Program to comply with Metro Title 13, and the county's comprehensive plan was amended to implement the Tualatin Basin Program. Next slide. So you may be familiar with this map representing a portion of the county's significant natural resources. It shows the mapped and inventoried natural resources that fall under the rules of Community Code Section 422, the Significant Natural Resources section. The legend on the right side of the slide names the resources and shows its corresponding mapped color. The first three highlight the county's resources. The blue areas are the water-related resources like streams and creeks and adjacent habitat within the dark green areas showing the mapped county wildlife habitat. The last two on the legend are Metro's riparian habitat class 1 and 2 areas shown in the brighter green colors. You can see on this map where they differ from the county's resources and areas where they overlap or are slightly different. Next slide. As I touched on a bit earlier, the county has had an acknowledged Goal 5 program that has been in place for many years that was established under the older Division 16 Oregon Administrative Rules. Then in 2017, the state legislature passed a series of laws to address the housing crisis. And one of those changes, SB 1051, requires local jurisdictions have clear and objective standards to make it easier for housing projects to move through the land development review process more quickly. This change at the state level brought to light issues with the county's natural resource standards that were not clear and objective, and several legal challenges followed that I will talk about in the next few slides as part of the presentation. The most recent Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA remand, revealed that the county had continued issues with its natural resource regulations, which will need to be addressed. Next slide, please. So in 2020, the county adopted A engrossed ordinance number 869, to address the enforcement order. The objective of the ordinance was to address the standards that were not clear and objective and make some minor changes that would aid in the development review process for sites with significant natural resources. When the ordinance was adopted, the enforcement order was lifted shortly thereafter. Both the ordinance number 869 and the habitat assessment guidelines were then appealed to LUBA in 2021. Next slide. So LUBA issued their decision in the fall of 2021 and remanded the ordinance back to the county. The main takeaway in the decision was that the county needed to follow the most current state OARs, Division 23, when making any changes to its natural resource regulations. So that means the rules and any standards that are referenced in those standards must be clear and objective. LUBA also found that the county must make findings on the record that all of the statewide planning goals are being balanced. In this case, LUBA highlighted the need to consider statewide planning goal 10, housing. Next slide. At the work session with the board, they agreed that the Planning Commission should serve an integral role in the remand of the ordinance. This will entail briefings throughout the Goal 5 process. Then the Planning Commission will hold public hearings and make recommendations on the changes to Goal 5 through the B engrossment of the Ordinance 869. Then the ordinance will return to the board for engrossment hearings and adoption. Next slide. So this graphic shows the series of Goal 5 process steps that we are working through over the next 18 months to ultimately lead us to the development of the county's Goal 5 program update with standards that are clear and objective. Next slide. Here's the corresponding timeline. Oh, next slide, please. Here's the corresponding timeline for the individual process steps in the previous slide. Phase 1 will take about 9 months, and the other 2 phases will be about 6 months each. We're hoping that there can be some adjustments to the timeline, and we will work to find ways to overlap some of the phases as we get into the project. Most likely, the Planning Commission will be briefed at these important milestones.
Could I ask a question? What does ESEE mean on phase 2?
So could you return to slide 10, please? So it's an acronym for analysis that includes the economic, social, environment, and energy consequences of allowing the use that's proposed for the land and evaluating those conflicts that could occur, whether you decide to allow that use to occur on a site with natural resources, or what are the consequences of prohibiting that use on the natural resources up against like those considerations within the conflicting use.
And that would apply to a specific project, or?
So it could apply, it would apply more to the specific area, the land use that is underlying the site that had the natural resources. So we would be looking at, for example, residential uses. When you look at that, you compare those economic, social, environmental, and energy, that use with protecting the natural resources, or maybe limiting the natural resources that are on the site, or prohibiting residential use, all the way to prohibiting that residential use on the site.
Okay, thank you. I see Commissioner Wellner has his hand up.
A couple of questions, and it may be a little early, but do you know how you're going to inventory the properties in a way that would result in a better outcome than what we already have? So I'll go ahead with that one, then I've got another one.
Yeah, that's in the upcoming slides, and I'll kind of go over that a little bit more detail there and focus in on your question with that slide, through that slide.
Okay, and maybe this is the same. Do you expect that there's going to be significant changes from Ordinance 869, or is this some minor adjustments?
It will be it's hard because we're going to be going through a more comprehensive Goal 5 process than what we did before. We may have more changes. It's hard to anticipate what we're doing. We have had some preliminary direction from the board to say we'd like to keep the water-related resources and how we regulate those similar, but how the analysis takes place for the other resources could result in some changes to how we have determined the regulations in the 869.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
So let's see, why don't we go to slide 11. You can kind of see the timeline that we have put in place, and then move on to slide 12, the next steps. So the county has posted a request for proposals for hiring a consultant team to assist us with this process. And the RFP request for proposals will be posted through next week. After that, we'll score and select a preferred team, and we intend to have our first meeting with the consultant team sometime next month. I guess I got a little bit backtracked on the slide that I was thinking about, Commissioner Wellner, and let me scroll through here and talk a little bit more. We might have missed the board direction. Slide 9. Okay, so at the July work session, the board approved updating the county's wildlife habitat inventory for the urban unincorporated area using Metro's upland habitat and the county's habitat mapping as a starting point. So that would be using what we have existing and reevaluating to see which sites may still contain habitat on them from the inventories that have been done in the past, and determining whether there's still significant natural resources. We won't likely be adding any. We may be adding areas of metro resources, especially in new UGB expansion areas, because previously the county hadn't done any inventories for those areas, say like Cooper Mountain, for example, or the areas near King City that have been added to the urban growth boundaries since 2005, when Metro inventoried those resources. And that's somewhat of a requirement of Title 13, to address Title 13.
Commissioner Wellner, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Do you know if Metro has updated that 2005 inventory? Because I'm assuming that there's, and I guess my hope would be you'd look at the Metro inventory and then you would look at some current aerial photos to confirm that things haven't changed so that we do in fact get it right.
That's exactly right, Commissioner Wellner. We'll plan it to be primarily like a GIS exercise to use information that we can use layers and information and resources that have already been compiled for those areas, especially like in the Cooper Mountain area. There's already been some updates that Beaverton is working on as they develop their as they do their planning for that area specifically, as an example. So
okay.
Using more recent data in that regard.
Thanks.
All right. I think that slide must have gotten flipped over or something. So why don't we go to slide 13 then? Sorry about this, everybody. Since the remanded ordinance isn't in effect currently, its requirements are not being applied to development applications. So this means that applicants are being advised that the county's regulations are in flux and that there's risk to moving forward with applications that might impact a natural resource, particularly wildlife habitat. If an applicant elects to move forward when they have on-site natural resources, they're being required to address statewide planning goal 5 directly and make findings based on their earlier version of section 422. So a residential subdivision application using this approach is currently being appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. An oral argument is scheduled for November 1st. Also, a petition to the Land Conservation and Development Commission requesting an enforcement order to compel us to make changes to our natural resource regulations is expected to be filed later this year. Next slide. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Wellner.
Does obviously the enforcement order would affect the county's implementation of section 422 and your goal 5 standards? How would that, is it possible that appeal could change the way you approach the current code too? Does the appeal force you to enforce things the way LUBA determined they should be enforced?
Well, I think Rob Bovet is here. Maybe he can tackle that question a little bit better than I could.
Sure. Commissioner Wellner, the enforcement order, are you referring to the old enforcement order that's now been removed? Are you talking about the new action seeking?
No, yeah, it's the second part of the question is really what I'm curious about is how does the county need to approach a decision, a LUBA decision? Does it have for future land use actions, does it have to respond to that LUBA decision? I guess for fear that another application is going to be appealed?
Well, maybe I could provide you a kind of a quick status update on litigation relating to SNR, and that might, by implication, answer your underlying question. So we have 2 actions that are pending. I would prefer to not go into too much detail because they are pending litigation, but we have a new request for a new enforcement order. That's proceeding at LCDC. We've filed a response. That's in process. We also have a new case going up to LUBA. We just filed our brief on Monday, and it really addresses this interim period between your adoption of future 869B. So essentially what happens between now and then. And that case is being actively litigated. We have oral argument on November 1. And I think the answer to your bottom line question is yes, both of those 2 cases could, depending on what is said, impact the work of LUT and what Michelle's been talking about. So whatever LUBA decides or LCDC decides on either of those 2 cases could impact Michelle's work, if that answers your bottom line question.
But it also could, it could also help the county to enforce the way Ordinance 869 was adopted and the way we had intended for it to be implemented.
It could.
I guess what I'm worried about is this wiggle room of uncertainty, or this gray area and uncertainty where we're at right now, and it affecting people's abilities to bring application in and feel comfortable that they're not at risk.
And I don't know that I'm going to give a whole lot of people a lot of assurance right now, because although I can say, as you well know, both LUBA actions and LCDC actions are very expedited. So I think that folks waiting for a little bit more guidance are going to get it here pretty quick.
With that November 1 decision?
Well, as soon as they decide after oral argument, yes. Okay. And then potentially soon thereafter, whether or not LCDC even takes up an enforcement order issue as well.
But we're not waiting for those actions. We're proactively moving forward with some changes.
Precisely. All these things are happening simultaneously.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify, Commissioner Wellner, we're using the earlier version of Section 422 in processing land use applications currently, not the changes that were made under ordinance number 869. Because it's not acknowledged, we need to rely on the acknowledged version of the prior version of section 422.
So
Okay.
that,
I'm not sure what,
if I could jump in, so that means whatever is decided using the earlier section 422 during this time of before the changes are decided for the future. Anything happening now, that's that's locked in. Is that the right language? That those projects approved under the prior language are insulated from future changes, is that right?
If I could take a short stab at that. So they would be subject to the regulations in effect at the time. And those regulations are the current ones. But we also know that the current ones have been subject to an earlier appeal and subject to the earlier enforcement order. And so that's why we're also asking people to make directly Goal 5 findings. So that's in addition to following the existing regulations, there's some additional backup based on state law. And we don't know if that is sufficient. That's what is being litigated. And so if LUBA determines that that approach that we've taken is sufficient, then that would be fine for all future applications. If they determine it's not, then that may well affect applications that are in process right now. And Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that maybe more directly answers Commissioner Wellner's questions.
Yeah, that might actually get deeper at his questions, but that's all as I understand it as well.
Okay, thank you. It's pretty complex, but thank you, that was clear.
So that was the extent of our presentation on that. Michelle mentioned that we are hiring a consultant, and that consultant will be helping us also with public engagement strategy. And that will include when and how often we would be back to the Planning Commission for briefings or for input. And so expect more on that after we hire the consultant. And we have them work with us on that. We'll come back to you with either the proposal for how to involve the PC and the public, or kind of their recommendation.
Good. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Miller. I think we're ready to move to our next topic. New state rules for climate-friendly and equitable communities.
Chair Lockwood, Steve Kelly, our senior planner in transportation planning, is going to give this presentation, but if I could just jump in and let people know that for people who are watching this meeting as attendees, if you don't have your camera on, they can't see you and they can't see that you were here. So they don't even get to see the black box with your name in it or maybe your photo. So it's pretty important for our community to know which planning commissioners were present. And I noticed just now everybody did appear to have their cameras on, so that's great. That's a good practice for meetings when we're running them in this virtual environment. I do know that sometimes when you're in a virtual meeting like this, there are things that come up that cause you to need to turn off your camera, but if we could keep those to minimal amounts of time, that would really be ideal. We are streaming this meeting as well, so people could be watching us from the YouTube stream and they wouldn't necessarily know that you were here if you don't have your camera on. So conversely for staff, if you're not presenting, you should have your camera off so that you're not showing up. So that's my housekeeping item of the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Mr.
for
Kelly?
that. Thank you, everyone. My name is Steve Kelly. I'm a senior transportation planner with the department. And I'm here this afternoon to talk with you about the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking process. I do not pretend to have all the answers. I'm just figuring this out, and but I will sort of give a presentation on this. And if questions do come up, please feel free to answer or ask those questions. Next slide, please. So today, I'm going to provide a high-level background of the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, and then dive into several of the areas and give really an overview of some of the areas that these rules will affect, and those being an overview of parking reform, touch on climate-friendly areas, and briefly discuss the transportation system planning requirements. Next slide, please. So these rules come from Governor Brown's executive order in 2020 to the State Departments to exercise any and all authority and discretion to meet Oregon's climate goals. And the Department of Land Conservation and Development considered amendments to the Oregon administrative rules focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They formed a rulemaking advisory committee. They had diverse membership of professionals with a wide variety of topic areas, as well as community members from around the state. Next slide, please. So these rules were just adopted in July, and they focus primarily on, I would categorize it as two areas. Land use and building are somewhat combined and intertwined in the rules, as well as transportation planning. These are sweeping rules that have a sweeping update to Oregon's land use and transportation planning system. Oregon has a long history of planning, and in many ways, these rules are an overhaul of the planning system, and they have many prescriptive requirements for land use, building, and transportation. The rulemaking was completed relatively quickly, particularly given the extensive effects that they may have over time. There are a number of cases where DLCD staff and others have noticed that there are discrepancies between different sections of the rules, and there are potentially unintended consequences that people are still sorting out as to what might be in here. Next slide, please. So the rulemaking, again, was the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And if I say the word CFEC, I hopefully you'll understand I'm referring to climate-friendly and equitable communities. And one of the main amendments was to the Oregon Transportation Planning Rule. So like the Goal 5 natural resources, there's the Goal 12 transportation planning rule. And the transportation planning rule was pretty extensive to begin with. These rules added 64 new sections. I think they may have deleted one, but they had previously had 16 sections. And just for reference as to how complicated these are, the House Bill 2001, that Oregon administrative rule has 29 sections. And again, these rules affect land use planning, they affect land development regulation, and they affect transportation planning. Next slide, please. So the rules apply in the metropolitan areas. The existing rules are still remain in effect outside of those metropolitan areas. It is my understanding that there is something like 50, 51 cities and counties that are affected by these rules. I don't have a complete count. I do know that at least 10 of the cities have joined together in a lawsuit to appeal these rules, and those do include several cities in Washington County. Hillsborough, Cornelius, Tualatin, and Sherwood are in that 10. I'm not sure of all the others, and some of the others cities have been contemplating it. I know Forest Grove was contemplating joining as well. It is anticipated that the cities will ask for a stay order on the implementation, and that stay order, if granted, could affect or change or delay the implementation process. So some of the timelines that I'll provide a little bit later on may be affected by our judicial system, but I don't know what those would be yet. I also want to point out that several prominent business organizations, the home builders, the Oregon State Chamber of Commerce, and others have formed a new coalition called People for an Affordable Oregon to oppose at least some of the requirements. And I'm not sure exactly what their take will be or exactly what the city's take will be. I will say that Washington County is supportive of the climate-friendly and equitable communities, all of the goals of that process. Frankly, I think most of our communities are supportive of the goals of that process. And I think there are some concerns about the potential costs and other requirements and the prescriptive level of requirements that are included in some of these rules. So there's still a lot to be sorted out with these, but wanted to get to the Planning Commission here to make sure we're informed on what is coming towards us from the state level. So next slide, please. Excuse me. There's two actual divisions of rules that have been amended. Division 44 of the Oregon Administrative Rules is related to the metropolitan greenhouse gas reduction targets. And the special rules for the Portland metropolitan area are a little bit different than for the other metropolitan areas. And Metro is figuring out how to also comply with not only the new transportation planning rules, but the greenhouse gas reduction target rules. And there's a lot of things in there related to our regional government as well. The regional government will be required to update the regional transportation functional plan, as well as the regional growth management functional plan. And Portland Metro will be required to provide annual performance monitoring reporting, and that will also be a requirement for the county to provide reports to Metro to sort of the overall regional report. What those look like is yet to be determined. Next slide, please. So this slide again shows a general rule phase in timeline. Some of these dates can potentially be adjusted. Others are very prescriptive. And we've been still working on figuring out which of these dates apply statewide and which apply in the Portland metropolitan area. The guidance is actually quite confusing. What we can tell you is parking reform is first. And we plan to come back with more information about parking options and how we can respond. I think we're planning to come back early next year. There is also the climate friendly area requirements. We expect that will start while we're finishing up the parking response. And that will be informed by the regional growth management plan update as well. Something that is potentially important for us is the transportation performance standards. These are being discussed as part of the regional transportation plan update scheduled for next year. So we'll see. That may or may not end up being a significant issue for unincorporated county. And then, frankly, the transportation system plan is one of the easiest. There's certainly some significant new rules for compliance there, but in many ways, we have already planned in a way that's consistent with the requirements. There are some additional inventory and project prioritization requirements. The plan will need to demonstrate a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And then what's really going to be important with our transportation system plan is there's a number of land development code requirements that go into effect when the transportation plan is updated. So next slide, please.
Oh, Mr. Bell.
Oh, Yes, go ahead.
Can I catch you on slide 8 for a second? How does parking reform connect to the climate friendly and equitable
I was
community?
going to talk about parking reform over the next couple of slides here. There are a range of parking reform rules, and we've been working with DLCD staff to figure out which ones apply in the unincorporated area. Some of the requirements appear to apply throughout the unincorporated area. Others are expressly for our regional and town centers, which are likely to become synonymous with the climate friendly areas. So maybe the next slide will help.
Okay.
So this lays out sort of the timeline for the parking reform. The first 2 dates there come up right away. And then the second 2 are after other events occur that are also required. The first one goes into effect January 1, after December 31, 2022. I think I have it in this presentation both ways, as January 1 and as after December 31. So either way, it sort of means the same thing. But at that point, most everybody's parking code will be out of date, including ours with the state requirements. The requirements expressly say that we cannot enforce requirements for minimum parking in a variety of circumstances. No minimum parking requirements near frequent transit. I'm going to list off some of the other uses, and also there's limitations on the extent to which the minimum amount of parking can be required. Then following that in January, the rules say that we are required to adopt one of several parking reform approaches. We've been considering if we want to work with DLCD staff on adjustment for the timing of adoption there. And then the next step is, once we've identified and adopted the climate friendly areas, the parking reform then needs to be compliant with the designation of climate friendly areas. And then finally, that last one, once we've adopted a transportation system plan update, the parking reform needs to remain compliant in the what will now be termed priority transit corridors. So we have something similar to that on our plan now, but to be determined how that plays out through a major TSP update in the future. So parking comes on fast and then is required to remain a consistent response as the other regulations become effective as well.
And the objective of these is what?
Well, the idea, I believe, is that reducing parking mandates has minimum parking requirements has a number of beneficial effects for discouraging extensive automobile travel, as well as for land utilization and
Okay.
allowing for additional density within development.
Thanks.
And again, this is minimum parking. Development is allowed to provide the parking that they would wish to provide, but there wouldn't be a minimum. There still would be parking maximums. Next slide, please. So again, there's these cannot enforce the requirements for minimum parking within proximity to transit. And there's two categories that are identified: rail transit stations, and we believe that is light rail stations as well as west stations. And then frequent transit is defined as 4 or more buses in the peak hour. In addition to that area, the rules require that we're not able to require more than 1 parking space per unit in residential developments with more than 1 unit. So we can't require 1.2 parking spaces. They could easily provide more than that, but that would be their choice, the development's choice. The rules will supersede the adopted Community Development Code effective January 1. And again, it's possible that a stay order will preempt the state rules from going into effect at that point. Development can decide. And then I just wanted to add that it's my understanding that providing a parking space in the Northwest costs for a ground space costs development somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 per space. And if that number's wrong, there are several of you that I'm sure can easily correct me on that. And developers, often complete a project and then market it for other owners or operators. And in some cases, that marketing requires that there is a certain amount of parking to serve the future tenants. Did I see a hand go up? I thought someone
Yes, you did. Commissioner Podar.
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. Thank you, Steve. Steve, I have after you finish with the slide, then I have a couple of comments and questions. Thanks.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, a couple of comments. I was at the TSP meeting with when the county was talking about transportation development, and there was a survey done in the county, and only 168 people responded. 168 respondents were taken into consideration while developing the TSP plan. That's 0.02% of the county, because we did not do an effective job in reaching out to the community and ensuring that we have a significant number of people participating in that plan. Now, I was also part of the climate justice, equitable, friendly community rulemaking process for the entirety of its time. One of the things when it comes to parking minimums, which has not been addressed, is that Washington County is a transit desert for all purposes, said in purposes. Hillsborough and Beaverton have light rail. There is no other transportation method connecting most of our majority of our county. So considering that we have majority of the development that is happening around transit is expensive. Orenco Station, minimum rental is $2,000, minimum rental. Same with Beaverton, I've been observing patterns of what development is being allowed near transit. It's all expensive development. People are being forced. We have gentrification going on in our county. Minimum housing price is $500,000. So if we have that circumstance and we have a transit desert, people are being forced to move to the fringes. What are we doing to ensure that people who are forced to have cars, not just one car, two cars, and three cars, because they're living on the fringes of the county or in the fringes of each city, how are we ensuring that they don't have to deal with the repercussions of the removal of minimum parking? Because that is a cause of grave concern. If I don't have access to public transit, how am I supposed to get to work? And when I come back home, if I do not have a place to park my car, what am I supposed to do? And with lower income, more and more families, 2 or 3 people have to work to make ends meet, because at minimum wage, the salary for the entire year is about $26,000 to $30,000, which is just barely enough to cover rent. So could you shed some light on what conversation have we had about addressing transit desert, as well as the removal of the minimum parking, if there has been a discussion? And then secondly, also, are we going to be including community voices intentionally moving forward? Thank you. I know it's a lot of question and comment.
Yeah, so I appreciate the comments, and I agree in a lot of ways. All I can say is that I'm here today to describe what these statewide rules prescribe, and that I don't necessarily have all of the solutions. I think you identified a number of problems there, and I appreciate that, and I certainly agree in many ways. So thank you. I don't have a direct answer for how are we going to respond at this point. That's to come. Is that another hand up?
Yes, Commissioner Milliman. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I actually have a scheduling conflict and have to leave the meeting, but wanted to make sure that I noted that.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry you have to leave.
Me too. I'll listen to the recording though.
Okay, well, hopefully, can we go to the next slide? I think the next slide is the most visual aspect of this presentation. This lays out the current Trimet schedule and identifies with the blue dot, the black dots with the blue circles around them. So this is the entirety of Washington County. It includes the urban areas, the cities and municipalities, and then it identifies all of the rail transit stations. We have not tried to parse out the incorporated versus unincorporated areas inside either the blue, or I'm going to call it orange, but it's kind of a mustard color, or the orange area. And this is based on the 3/4 mile as the crow flies from a rail transit station, and 1/2 mile from bus routes with 4 or more buses in the peak hour. And it shows the areas of Washington County, regardless of jurisdiction, where our community will not be able to require minimum parking. I've seen several of the cities developed similar versions of this. At least one of the cities had a few differences on their version. So we're all sort of working together and trying to figure out what these new rules will mean on the ground and in our areas. It's important to note that as Trimet expands service to get back to the pre-pandemic levels. The areas that are orange are anticipated to become substantially more of the county throughout both south and throughout the urban area. These state requirements for not being able to enforce minimum parking requirements go into effect January 1, and we will basically be using that as our using the state requirements at that point, unless there's a stay order or something. And then we'll be back, I think, in early 2023 to contemplate changes to the development code. One of the changes that we'll need to consider is the removal of all minimum parking requirements throughout the urban area. There are some alternatives, and we're still debating internally and evaluating if those are actually practical for unincorporated Washington County. Are there any further? Oh, Matt, there's another question related to parking changes.
Thanks, Steve. It might be helpful to see kind of what the buildable lands layer looks like relative to this, because a lot of that area is probably built out, is my assumption. I mean, obviously there can be redevelopment in the future, but there's already a lot of parking in those areas.
Yeah, and we have not begun to do that evaluation. Right now, we're still figuring out, looking at what the impact would be from Trimet's schedule changes and how they might phase that in. So this is kind of an evolving process at this time, and we're still, but yeah, it'd be interesting to know how much developable area or redevelopable area is inside those, inside that.
Yeah, to what Commissioner Podar was saying is, I mean, if you look at, if we didn't have parking requirements in North Bethany, that could have been a nightmare.
Right.
and we wouldn't have been able to require them after January 1. So.
Right.
Commissioner Podar.
Thank you. Actually, in Bethany, the new condos that were developed right across Bethany Village, I was there the other day. So there are all these attached homes, and they only have that one garage for one car. And it's disallowed any family and friends from visiting, because there were literally about, I think, 10 to 12 parking spots available for 100 apartments, condos. It was absolute nightmare, and I went there for work. So I had to walk about 25 minutes from parking across the thing and then walking all the way with things to the place that I was supposed to do henna. So that's just one observation. But I really want to keep highlighting that when we talk about climate justice, equitable communities, all of the people who are usually part of it, the focus is on usually around Portland, which has a lot of transit. So what Trimet says every half an hour, every 45 minutes and peak hours, it's actually even pre-pandemic, there was no transit. Post 10 p.m., you cannot get out of Beaverton on public transit. There is no public transit available from Cedar Hill Sunset to downtown Portland. So there is no way to get anywhere from Washington County at night. So if you have a night shift job, good luck to you. If you're coming back at night, good luck. So our transportation system and even the TSP, the plan that was being discussed at the county level, I think it is, we are instead of moving forward and progressing at a much faster rate, we are sitting back and discussing things like we have 10 years to wait. And that's what the plan was about, 5 to 10 years. So for the next 5 to 10 years, our communities are supposed to continue to deal with climate change, lack of affordable housing, lack of transportation. It's amazing that things that need to be sped up are not being sped up, and we are discussing the county and everybody else, all jurisdictions are discussing it like we have plenty of time, instead of saying we need to do this, but we cannot work with a symptom mindset. Removing parking is a symptom. Have we provided transit to people? We haven't. Without taking care of the problem, we are addressing symptoms. And that is that feels very frustrating. So I really do request that all of us planning commissioners think about it as we go more and more into this rulemaking that's going to change how we handle all of that blue yellow. That's hardly 10 to 15% of the county. The rest of it is disconnected. People cannot reach each other. So, and I'm going to be very insistent about this. I request you all to bear with me. I'm in all of those spaces where they're discussing this. I'm connecting the dots. And there are days where it's frustrating and irritating, annoying, and there are these hot tears of frustration that we are not doing what needs to be done to support our community versus just telling them, you can't do this, you can't do this. And people who are impacted already continue to get impacted. Those who have privileges continue to enjoy privileges, and they are not affected by these laws and rulemakings. That's it.
I just want to jump in and thank you for your comments on that, Commissioner Podar. You are echoing a number of the comments that staff gave to the Department of Land Conservation and Development through the process of making these rules. We are inherently a regulatory agency, and one of the things we have regulatory authority over is parking minimums. And so in making these rules, they applied that to us, and we don't have any flexibility with this. The rules are what they are. They were adopted. They were put into place. We will be required to enforce them. So we feel a little bit stuck, just like you're expressing, and we're not generally the transit provider, with the exception of a little bit of money we get for the rural area, and that's the meeting that I think you're referring to. That was on our countywide statewide transportation improvement funds, which is a small pot of money we get to run shuttles into the rural area and make connections to the existing Trimet system. Trimet's our transit provider. So we're in this very reactionary position of making these maps that show Trimet's transit service, but we don't have the ability to make Trimet give us more transit service. And Trimet, quite frankly, doesn't have the money to do that either. And so, so I sense your frustration, and we share it at our level. So we're doing what we can on that and raising these same concerns. The jurisdictions that Steve referred to that have joined together in a lawsuit against the state are raising many of these same points as well, that these regulations are possibly going to have unintended consequences that we haven't thought through, and we're perhaps not the right or the best way to address some of these challenges we're facing. So these points are all very well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, those comments sounded like some that I made during the process as well, and I appreciate, and others that I heard from other staff at other cities. So again, while the rules that we think have the right direction here in a lot of respects, the implementation is on the ground is going to be very complicated to figure out. And I really appreciate your comments. So keep them coming. Thank you. And agree in many ways. So let's move on to sort of give an overview of the future of where these rules are headed. So let's go to the next slide. And so one of the attributes of these rules are called climate-friendly areas. And it's our understanding that these will be generally similar to our town centers and regional centers. And these come online after the parking rules, which are clearly first. And Washington County and the cities will need to work with Metro on an update to the regional urban growth management functional plan and the regional transportation functional plan. And those amendments, as they come in, we're not sure what they'll be or how impactful they will be. The areas that are designated as climate-friendly areas will have detailed prescriptive land development requirements and reduced auto analysis requirements. Next slide, please. What I can say about the climate-friendly areas is we anticipate that they will need to accommodate at least 30% or more of both existing and needed housing. It's currently unclear, at least I'm unclear, if that is a regional allocation or if that is a jurisdiction by jurisdiction requirement. And I think those will be discussed as we work with the region on the regional growth management functional plan update. And there are two approaches that the climate-friendly areas will need to consider. And I tried to summarize them there, but there's kind of a prescriptive and kind of an outcomes-based option. And those are in addition to a whole lot of many pages of detailed prescriptive requirements that apply in the within the climate-friendly areas once they're designated. The next slide, please. At a similar time that those climate-friendly areas are being designated and the planning is going on, there's transportation performance standards. And I know a number of jurisdictions are really concerned about how these performance standards will play out at a range of levels. At this point, I'm referring to performance measures and performance standards as being the same thing, but a standard is how you specify a target for a measurement, right? So these new performance measures are being considered regionally as part of the regional transportation plan update. And the last three at the bottom of the page there are in the draft that's being discussed now. And the one that we're pretty certain will need to be a requirement is a measure of vehicle miles traveled per capita. And then the region is also looking at system completeness. And the way I've seen it described is hours of freeway congestion. We took a careful look at how we do development review as part of our performance measures when we updated the transportation system plan back in 2013, 2014. I think we're ahead of the game on this, but we've been sort of in delay mode, kind of waiting to see what comes out of the regional and statewide processes related to performance measures before adopting something that ends up being overwritten by preempted by a state or regional planning rule. So that may or may not turn into something really important to be determined. And then next slide, please. And finally, there's a major transportation system plan update will be required. The transportation system plan that we have today is generally consistent with the requirements, but there's some important differences. Also, it's important to note that the adopting the major transportation system plan update triggers a number of additional land development and community development code changes. So as part of our transportation plan update, we'll need to have parallel conversations about the changes to the development code that will be necessary to comply with the rules. And I think I've got one last slide here. Yeah, so I listed some of the main things on this slide that the TSP update will need to address, including just sort of an update for project for our growth assumptions and consistency with other plans. But the requirements related to how we go about project prioritization are new. We will continue to need to do multimodal inventories there are specific roadway design requirements and road categories that we have not addressed in our plan. Auto capacity expansion requires a special kind of analysis. And so as we complete a transportation plan update, we'll need to do that for where it is applicable. And many of the major roadway expansions will need to consider alternatives. There was mentioned about engagement, and there is extensive engagement requirements. And there's also a thing I'm hoping to learn more about, I'm sure I will, that is called equity analysis. And I don't know a lot about it, but I don't know anyone that does either. But that is a new requirement that I'm looking forward to learning some more about. And then in addition to that engagement, there is requirements for ongoing engagement, and including an updated report on engagement and equity analysis that goes into effect with our transportation system plan update. And so next slide, please. That's all I have today. I'm hoping that there will be questions and discussion, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Do we have more questions? Commissioner Wellner.
Only a comment that Commissioner Petrillo has been asking for a major TSP update for 4 years, and now he's finally getting one when he's coming off the Planning Commission. Congratulations, Jeff.
Commissioner Podar.
Thank you. I have a question. Since we said that we are not, we don't determine transit and we don't do this, and so how do people get things done? Whom do we go to get to, so that if climate crisis is our, climate crisis is our reality, we have to address it. We are going to see massive movement of people internally, because we are going to have domestic refugees due to climate change. People from Florida, Puerto Rico, and other cities and states are going to start moving to places that are somewhat okay right now. So we are going to see that. But we have to address climate change. We do not have public transit, and we apparently don't have money to do things. So which is the agency that actually connects all the dots and all of these loose strings, if I can say, and says, we need a plan? What is that plan, and who is that plan maker? Could somebody clarify that? That would help a lot.
I think that's a really great question, and I'm not sure any of us have the answer as to who's the one decider of all of these things. It is a number of different pieces provided by different levels of government and different agencies. I will share that the Board of County Commissioners is interested in doing a climate action plan for the county, and that could be both internally focused on county operations and regulations, as well as somewhat externally focused in our community. They're in the scoping process for that work, and I'm not sure exactly which way it's going to go, but that would be something you would probably be interested in tracking as they go forward. I don't recall the exact date off the top of my head, but they have an upcoming work session or board meeting where they'll be talking about it. It may be next week, but it may be later this month. And then on the transit side of things, Trimet is the regional transit provider for most of urban Washington County. There's also SMART, which covers part of Wilsonville. So if you're specifically looking for more transit service, then Trimet would be the agency to go and talk to. And of course, opportunities for more funding for transit is always something that Trimet would be interested in.
We've got two hands up, and I think Commissioner Petrillo, you might have been first. Would you go ahead, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, since it's a general question, and it was not specifically addressed to any particular person. I just thought I would respond to say, to Commissioner Podar's question, which I think is not intended to be rhetorical. So I think the function would be primarily with the elected officials and what their priorities are relative to these climate issues. In particular, it would be at the state level, it would be at the executive level, which would be the governor having a priority, and the legislative body, the legislature, trying to adopt or execute or put into law climate policies, friendly policies. And there have been attempts at the state legislature that were not passed over the last couple of years. This coming election, about 30 days from now, will be a factor in that, since there is a difference of opinion among the three major candidates on this issue. So I think ultimately it's like, well, it's the elected officials, and to what degree those elected officials have set it as one of their top priorities. Without them doing that, I think it will remain a policy issue that gets discussed at the policy level, staffing levels, but not executed without the elected officials making it a priority.
And I can add, I just had clarification from one of our excellent staff who's listening and can check agendas very quickly. And she confirmed that the board has a work session on the climate resolution on October 11th. So if you're interested in hearing the board discussion, that would be a good one to listen into.
And yeah, Commissioner Will.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I just guess I want to throw in a comment here. I think it's very exciting, and that in planning for transportation and land use, that we're starting to think about, environment, which traditionally was just like parks planning or something, and health, and the merging of these things are becoming more clear. I've been a long time proponent of upzoning areas along major transportation corridors to allow higher density residential and or commercial, for that matter, to support the demand for transit. It's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? What comes first, the MAX train or the high rapid transit bus, or the people who are going to ride it? I think unfortunately it's often Trimet doesn't send more transit services or better quality transit services to areas that don't have demand or don't have density. So it's going to be very interesting in the coming years with the work we did in the spring and a lot of suburban areas which had, low density, perhaps in creating some more middle housing. So some of those bus routes through existing residential neighborhoods might actually, grow in density and actually be able to support more frequent and better quality transit service. But I think we as a body and as a county can continue to look at these corridors, like, for example, that was shown on the graphic, and think about what type of density we could allow through changes in zoning to promote the use of the transit, which would reduce the demands on, miles traveled, or demands on the congestion, or reduce demand on asphalt and concrete for large parking lots, which is just an environmental input alone. And just as a brief example, I know there's a site in a suburban area of Washington, about 7 acres, and there's a development there of about 220 multifamily units, and another site in Portland that's about 1 acre and has a development of 240 multifamily units. And so the site in Battleground that I'm thinking about is so large because it needs parking, where the site in Portland has 0 parking. So we might not be able to have those extremes in Washington County in the near future of 0 parking like Portland has, but 7 times the size of land impact for the exact same number of dwelling units. So we can think about ways to target high density at areas where even if parking minimums are removed, that we can still serve the people who live there in the so if it's located in the right spot. And so following those corridors, I think is the right track, and I look forward to hearing more about it. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? No, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you.
We've been in session about an hour and a half. This might be a time for a break. Any objections to a 5-minute break? All right, see you in 5 minutes.
Chair Lockwood, you are unmuted.
Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yes, Chair, I had a point of information or inquiry, which is, did we have a public comment or oral communication? Was that announced already, or did I just space out and forget about it and we did it?
Do you mean the time when we say oral communication and people in the public can speak to us?
Yes.
Yeah, and the clerk, Susan, said there wasn't anybody signed up.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So I can only see 4 of us at the moment. Okay.
I see 7 active.
Yeah, I think something happened to the way I'm my view. Sorry. Okay. Something has changed. Sorry about that. Because I can only see 6 people. So is everybody back? Sorry, I can't tell. Here we go. All right. All right. Do we need a roll call to come back into session?
I'm not
I guess-
Go ahead, Rob.
I don't think it's necessary unless there's some reason for it. We're just providing some information about a work session. So actually, you don't even need a quorum.
Okay, all right, then let's get started. Our next item is possible future work session topics.
Thank you. So Todd Borkowitz will give this presentation. We've talked in the past about possible work session topics, and we wanted to give you an update on what you had asked for before and what happened over the last couple of years, and what other topics you might want added. And I see actually Commissioner Podar's hand is up, so.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so sorry, Chair Lockwood. I have to leave in about 10 minutes due to an urgent meeting. I wanted to request that would we be able to discuss the future meetings that are supposed to happen in person, or can I just send in my feedback about that?
About the hybrid PC meetings topic,
Yes.
that one? Sure,
Yes.
please do.
Awesome. I'll just send it in later, or can we just, is it possible to shift that for now, to bump it up for now before I leave so that we have some discussion about it, if possible?
I think you said you had to leave at 3.
I have to leave in 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. So I think I wouldn't want to start and have to stop. And
Okay,
but would you send in your comments?
I'll do that. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, before you go, Commissioner Podar, I think it was a reasonable request. I mean, I know it's very different to have verbal contributions as opposed to written. And I know we have 6 of our commissioners here, and she's asking for a 10-minute window, and I don't think that's too unreasonable. I just wanted to vote in the affirmative if we were able to shift it for a few minutes to do that.
Is there any objection from anyone to using the next 10 minutes? And then we'd have to switch back, I think, to our agenda. Commissioner Will.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that maybe Commissioner Podar is just asking to make her comments, and then we could take note of those and not have the whole discussion, just have her have a chance to share her comments, and then we keep note of them, and we don't have to continue. We could go back to the agenda after she makes her comments. Am I correct?
Is that what you would like, Commissioner Podar?
Yeah, Lockwood, if we can have, if you can shift the meeting, the agenda to include the discussion right now, that would be lovely. Otherwise, I can just leave my comments and that can be taken into consideration for later.
Because I think there's also some framing of the discussion that's happening prior to having it. So I don't know the benefit of her making comments if we don't all have the same frame of understanding.
And we may be able to do the staff report relatively quickly. It will depend on how much conversation the Planning Commission wants to have, but maybe we could do the quick staff report and then take Commissioner Podar's comments right after that. So we set a little bit of context, but we can do that pretty quick, I think.
Thank you.
All right, let's do that.
Okay. So good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Principal Community Planner. Sorry. So what we want to talk to you today about was the idea of transitioning from all virtual meetings to some form of hybrid meetings. Some of you may have noticed that the board has started doing hybrid meetings, so it seemed it was time to start this discussion with the Planning Commission and just get your input on it. Next meeting. So Erin's talked a little bit about some of the changes. We've been undertaking some technological changes behind the scenes related to the Planning Commission meetings. So we do have the new website. We've gone to what's called the iAgenda, which is what the board uses as well for their agendas. It's on the county calendar now. So there's, you go to the one place and you have all the different LUT boards and commissions, as well as the Board of Commissioners. We're live streaming on YouTube, and there'll be video recordings now of the PC meetings. And then we, as a part of all of that, have started talking about hybrid meetings. The idea with a hybrid meeting, at the least, if we do go back to in-person, we will always have to offer a hybrid approach to community members to be able to testify remotely and participate remotely. So the idea of hybrid, where some people are in person and some people are remote, is the idea of hybrid. The board did start hybrid meetings in September, and a lot of times the Planning Commission follows the lead of the board. So we started thinking this is how we would proceed, and maybe we would do that for the next October meeting. And then we stopped and thought, do we need to just assume that? Maybe we need to talk with the Planning Commission and get your feedback. It's been 2.5 years now almost that we've been doing remote meetings, and people have gotten used to it, I think, in a lot of ways. And so we wanted to get your feedback before suggesting any changes. The board hasn't given any direction yet on whether they want boards and commissions to go back in person or if they're okay with remote or how they want it to go. They may give that direction in the future, but at this point, we're not sure if they have a particular direction. Next slide. So we thought we would propose some options for discussion and get your input, your thoughts and feedback, and then kind of mull that over before kind of together making a determination on how to move forward. So we came up with 4 different scenarios. One would be to continue like we are now, fully remote for PC members and staff. I'll just note, in all of these scenarios, members of the public would be able to attend either in person or remotely. As I noted, we do have state law that says we need to provide that, that remote ability for people in the public. So second option would be for PC members and staff to be in person for all of the meetings in the in the auditorium here. That's one of the reasons some of the staff is here kind of checking out how part of that might work. There could be an option where PC members and staff would have the option of being here or virtual. And then another idea came up about maybe there's periodic in-person meetings. So we would meet in person either quarterly or for the day meetings or the night meetings or some other kind of frequency. And then the other meetings would be remote. So these are just the ideas that staff had thought of and talked a tiny bit with Chair Lockwood yesterday about talking with the full PC about it. And so with that, actually, those are the options. We just wanted to get your discussion and feedback.
All right, thank you.
Would you mind
Commissioner
flipping back one more? Would you mind flipping back to the, yeah, thank you. Just wanted to capture that before you ended it.
Commissioner Podar?
Thank you.
Chair Lockwood, thank you, Teresa. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about the possibility of moving to hybrid situation. One, on an equity forefront, a lot of people we know that people have had to let go of, I'll use myself as an example. I do not have an employee anymore to run my small business. So back in the day, people were able to take time off from their work because they had the privilege and ability to do that. But majority people now, they cannot do that. They have childcare, they have small businesses to run, they have health issues. It's an accessibility issue also, that do we need to have this meeting in person? Because now since all of the planning commissions, we are not doing this as part of our job. This is something that we do as 100% volunteer work. It has to be some sort of not the convenience, the accessibility factor has to be taken into factor, that we don't know whether the meetings will run 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. Sometimes we've had meetings that have run late into night. It's a safety issue as well. And getting during considering that we have so many transportation headaches and hassles, people have to plan for an hour and a half sometimes to reach the county offices. So we have to take into travel time consideration, climate consideration, all of it. So I think I much prefer seeing all of your faces like this, and we're not sitting in a row, not being able to look over at each other. This is a lot more convenient where I can see where everybody is raising their hand and what they're saying. It's almost like having a conversation, and the community is still being able to communicate with us, because majority community is probably going to take some time out of their busy day and sign up for testimonies. So they still get to see us. This is amazing that we do have to keep our cameras on. Yes, it's inconvenient sometimes considering our background, but if the meetings were moved to hybrid where PC members were asked to come into place, it would be almost next to impossible to make it to all the meetings, considering that people still have to be at work or still have to take care of children or family members. We have joint family systems now, so people are the caregivers of their parents. So I think as an equity base, unless a very valid reason can be put forward why PC members need to be in a meeting in person, I think we can continue to stay virtual and have like a 3 times a year gathering. So every 3 or 4 months we can meet one time in case we need to meet in person for certain events or for certain important discussions that need to be made in person. Just wanted to say that, and yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You got a lot into those few minutes, and a lot of things.
Vice Chair does.
Yeah. A lot of things that I've been thinking about too.
I hope all of you have a lovely day. It is at every step of the way. Remember, our county commissioners have to be, that is their work, so they have to be in person. But and they have a lot of meetings with various jurisdictions. We don't. So thank you for listening in, and thank you, Vice Chair Dai, for allowing, finding the right words to move on the agenda.
Yeah, right,
Take care, everyone. Have a lovely day.
right. Bye-bye. So,
You can stop the screen share unless someone else needs it.
I'm thinking that we now move back to our agenda. Is that going to work for everyone to do that?
I think it's at the chair's discretion unless there's an objection.
Well, I'm really glad that Vice Chair Dai suggested we have Commissioner Podar speak. I think that was great to get all of her thoughts out. But now I'm dealing with my dilemma of since we started thinking about it, do we go ahead or do we change gears and go back to what we were doing? Commissioner Will.
I would lend to just finish this topic. I also have to leave at 4 p.m. So in case I miss out on the next one, I'd like to just finish this topic.
Yeah, I kind of
have a problem.
I kind of feel like that's what I would like to do too. But any other comments or preferences on this? Commissioner Wellner.
I'm not going to say one way or another what I would want moving forward because I'm not going to be here in 3 months. But I did, first off, when you make the commitment to the commission, originally, I think for all of us, the expectation was that you'd be attending meetings in person. I understand the need to be flexible with everybody, but when we agreed to volunteer our time, it was with the understanding that we would be in meetings in person twice a month. So that's part of it. But I see a lot of value in, there's a couple of you that I haven't even met and shaken a hand and met in person. And I find Zoom meetings to be a little bit impersonal. We don't get an opportunity to create a relationship with one another. And obviously we could do it on a limited basis outside of the meetings, but it's nice to walk into a meeting and say hi and how you doing. And I find the engagement of in-person meetings to be a good thing. That said, I'm not gonna be here in 3 months, so I don't want to dictate how you guys meet moving forward.
Commissioner Bidu.
Let me know if you can't hear me. I have to leave my house because my internet stopped working. I just wanted to echo Commissioner Podar's comments about equity. I think that, if we do a hybrid version.
There's a lot of background noise.
Let's see if I can get better, sorry. So I think that there is an equity issue, and that, people might be able to better volunteer. We might be able to expand the volunteer pool for future commissioners if we do adopt a hybrid model. Having said that, I do find a lot of value in meeting in person as well. So I think that it would be most equitable to have the option of being online, but also having the option of being in person.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone, yes, Commissioner Petrillo.
I may not be around, but it's not going to preempt, I think, Mike from making a comment. There is a difference, I think, between an online meeting that's exclusively online and one that is in person. If I'm understanding correctly, the hybrid would allow for both, or is it that the hybrid would just be for the public comment or participation element?
I believe it allows for both. Sorry, go ahead.
It allows for both for planning commissioners to participate both if needed remotely and in person and/or in person, correct?
Correct.
Then, I guess one is it doesn't seem like there's a debate. It's people who would prefer to meet remotely or who need to meet remotely or it's most convenient can meet remotely. And those, because there is a sense of connection and empathy or, when you're meeting with people face to face, and we aren't a like fifth level type public body. We're fairly highly ranked in terms of importance in the land use in county planning decisions, that it's a weighty body that makes weighty decisions or recommendations. And I think there's a benefit from there's more benefit for me for in-person than continuing remote meetings exclusively. I think Vice Chair Dye mentioned many months ago how it's problematic for him that he's never met any of us or seen any of us in person. So I think there is a lot to be gained by having an in-person meeting and allowing some who need to do hybrid. And my preference is, and I think for the public purpose, is in favor of having in-person meetings when it's possible for people to make accommodations for that to happen.
Commissioner Wellner.
I think if the hybrid works technologically, then that's obviously the way to go. But I know historically, and maybe Zoom has changed this for everybody, but historically, when we've tried to pipe somebody into the hearing chambers, the meetings got really clunky and people talked over each other. And so I would almost think that it's better to do one or the other, not both.
And if I might answer to that, we have our IT person here, and he was raising his hand, and I think he was raising his hand in support of what Commissioner Wellner just said, that it does get clunky if, oh no, he raised his hand because he wants to say something? Yes. So at the chair's pleasure,
Sure.
our IT person, Michael Niemeyer, will make some comments maybe about how it's working for the board.
Yes, that sounds good.
Great.
So I would personally say that hybrid isn't as clunky as you would think it would be. Obviously, the Board of Commissioners does do it every week. So there is times that you might have 2 commissioners here. There's times that you might have all the commissioners here. A lot of it does fall back on people like Todd and Susan then to help moderate, but also on the chair themselves. A lot of raising of hands and things like that. But we do have enough stuff here to help mitigate a lot of the clunkiness that you might have seen before in the auditorium. So if you were in person, there would be a screen in front of you, so you would be able to see your Zoom just like you're in your office right now looking at it. When the screens are shared, you see it just like you see it at your desk. There is a microphone system here that you guys used before, so it's just the same way. You key the mic, you talk then, and then just doing it back and forth like that. So it just falls a lot more on the chair and staff to help moderate, but I wouldn't say that it is clunky like you would think it would be.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Niemeyer, as long as he's giving us his expertise? Is there any other commissioner who wants to comment on the issue of how to conduct our future meetings?
If I might add one thing about the clunkiness factor. Part of that could be in interacting among the Planning Commission when some members are remote and some members are in person. So that interaction and the benefit of having people together or not could be affected by having some people together and some people not.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment?
Looks like Vice Chair Dye has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Oh.
thank you.
I'll go after Commissioner Will.
Commissioner Will.
Am I off mute? My screen's
You're
not
off
muted.
mute. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I work in Multnomah County, and when I committed to being in person, I think we were already in COVID protocol, so I've never been in person, but I was ready to go in person when I committed. But I think it's great if a commissioner has something come up in their personal life, being volunteers, and can't get across town in traffic or whatever the case may be, because the bus transit service is so slow. I'm joking. That they could still attend and participate. So I like the in-person model, with the understanding that a commissioner might need to and choose to participate in virtually in circumstances where they need it to. So I don't know what the commission would do, if somebody constantly is never there and they just always go virtual. Is that a bad thing if one commissioner just continually doesn't show up? But I as a working person would appreciate that flexibility, so that I can make my boss happy as well as make the community well served.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dye.
There's a couple of ways I was thinking about this and was trying not to, put my personal needs in front of the needs of the organization, because it is important that the work of the commission is done. But I do want to think about how much participation we've allowed now that we have provided people the option of participating from where they are, and not having to burden people from having to come into Hillsborough to participate in a meeting, and especially those that might only have a few-minute window of contribution before they are asked to, leave, or they might give their open testimony and move on. And then once again, we're creating a lot of a carbon footprint, because we've put people in a situation where they could have done something very easily remotely. There's also the safety issue that I think about, and I could only imagine having to come out of Hillsborough at 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m., whatever that night that was that we stayed, and had to kind of hash through some things to basically come home at midnight after a planning commission meeting, and then having to get up and go to work the next day at 5:30. I think there's a need to bring our meeting structure into the post-COVID world, and understand that life is now happening virtually in a way that it hadn't happened before. And I don't want us to be put in a situation where we're boxing people out because we're kind of mandating that they must be present to be fully participating, when we spent the last 3 years pretty much showing that we can be fully engaged and participating without setting foot into a space. And so I manage a workforce, that's statewide, and we have employees that live out of state that I've never met, and I am in meetings with them every day, and they're fully productive and fully engaged. And I think that I don't want us to kind of regress to a model that was exclusionary for many, just for the sake of nostalgia, when we've already established that we're able to be successful and move forward and still get the work of the Planning Commission done.
If I may interject 1 second, I'm not remote, so I don't have the ability to raise my hand in that way, in the electronic way. So my apologies on that. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that the public will always have the ability so we will be on Zoom regardless if we are hybrid and we're in person and virtual, we will always have the ability for the public to be virtual and for the public to make comment and testify in that way. So the question really is more about planning commission members and their virtual or in person or the ability to be either.
Yeah, and if I could pick up on that, I mean, you might be responding to the word exclusionary, but yeah, I think clarifying that the public can always participate no matter which of these modes we go into is important. But also, I think the word also exclusionary refers to who can serve. If we make it that people can serve if they're able to be here physically, or in the downtown Hillsborough physically at a certain time and place, I think there are a lot of people who cannot do that, but who could serve effectively if they had the remote option. So that's part of this that is important to me, that we have a setup that allows as many people in the community the opportunity to serve as possible. Vice Chair Dye, is your hand up?
It is. And Chair Lockwood, I appreciate you recognizing that I had what is talking about both ways, because I'm not just talking about people that are to comment, but also those who would want to serve on the planning commission and maybe don't have a car. They might be transit dependent. Again, I was trying not to get my personal situation in, but there are times when it would take me almost 2 hours to get to Hillsborough to make a meeting. And that it absolutely disrupts my day, my life, and everything else to go along with it in order to serve. As you know, I was serving on another board before I came to the Planning Commission, and our meetings were in Hillsborough, and there were times when it was anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours before I could make a meeting, missing an extraordinary amount of time from work. And I was lucky that I have enough flexibility in my day to make this thing work, but I can only imagine an hourly employee or someone with not the same type of job having, wanting the desire to serve and being able to understand with the work of the commission, but, we're setting up more barriers, for only a select group of people to be able to serve effectively by mandating, again, a system that is becoming a lot less necessary. So I just wanted to verbalize that I was not just speaking on the public being able to, but also who is serving now, as well as who could be serving in the future.
Yeah. I guess I'll have one other comment, which is I served 3 years in the in-person format, and these last 2 years in the virtual. And while I agree it's nice to be with people in person, when you're in the in-person format, you're in this dais and you're all looking out at the auditorium. You don't have the opportunity to see people's faces. So I've kind of liked that I can see people's faces as they participate in this virtual format. So that, there's things to measure on both sides. So is there any other comment at this point? Ms. Cherniak, do you feel like we have, we need to make a decision, or
we had
a
been,
chance to?
Yeah,
go ahead.
We had been suggesting that the next meeting be in person, and I'm wondering if we want to try that as a hybrid, so that the people who can be here, it's all hybrid. It's tough to, the hybrid, I guess I would call it, maybe. The ability for both the Planning Commission and public to be in person or hybrid. So we could try that as a way to, because it sounded like there was some interest in people being able to be here, but also some interest in being able to be remote if that works best for you. So that might be an option to try that at the next meeting. So I think
Well,
it's,
yeah, I think it makes sense to test things rather than put it down in stone what we're going to do. Commissioner Petrillo.
Well, I just wanted to reiterate that or echo that. Whatever is decided, give it a 6-month trial and say you're going to revisit it in June and modify if necessary.
So what I think is being proposed is that the next meeting be in person, but that, well, what's a good way to say this? The next meeting is hybrid, meaning people can
fully
attend.
hybrid. Yes.
People can attend in person or they can attend virtually, right?
Right.
Okay.
And we would need to know, so we probably would survey planning commission members the day before to see who would be here so that our IT staff could set up the room in that way and have the right equipment with the right camera and such. So we would need to know that the day ahead, who would be here in person. But I think we could definitely try that.
How does that sound? Does that sound acceptable to commissioners? Okay. All right, let's try that for next time, where each commissioner has the option of participating in person or virtually. And let staff know a day ahead what you're planning to do, or yeah. If you're gonna be.
Has his hand up.
Thank you, Commissioner Havener.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think that when you asked that question, Chair Lockwood, about is that okay with everybody? And then the beauty, I guess, if you will, of not being in person is nobody responds. That a negative is a positive, and people's intent gets misconstrued. I was not going to make a comment for fear that somebody would think that it was not appropriate, but I did appreciate Commissioner Wellner's comment that we did commit to in-person meetings. It has a greater value of being in person with each other, and it keeps us accountable to each other, whether it's showing up on time or leaving the meeting early. We have other business to conduct today, and we've lost a couple of commissioners because something more important came up. So while I appreciate the ability to have greater equity and inclusion with the potentially larger audience of commissioners serving on the planning commission, there is an accountability issue that we talked about in our value statement earlier, or 2 years ago, or whenever that was, that we were respectful of each other's time and commitment to this project. And that seems like it's getting missed. That's all.
Chair, I just want to, Commissioner Petrillo, I just want to endorse Commissioner Havener's position as well. I do feel like it can get to a point where we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, creating a lot of logistical problems for staff, as well as losing some of the importance of the meeting element. Becomes almost, it can become secondary to other things.
I think I'll come out and say if I were choosing, I would choose the virtual meeting with a couple of in-person meetings a year where we had some time to spend a little time to get to know each other, because that also was very limited when we were meeting in person previously, before the pandemic. So, what am I saying? I think showing up for the meeting and participating in the meeting is being accountable, whether it's virtual or in person. Any other comments? Commissioner Will.
I want to say one last thing about, I think the reason we went to virtual in the first place was because of COVID.
Yes.
And I don't know if anybody has remaining concerns about being exposed to COVID with in-person meetings. But if there are, that's one other reason why in the near term, the Planning Commission could decide to promote the flexibility, because that health choice is a personal choice for all planning commissioners, just like it is for the citizens who may choose not to come because they're concerned about being exposed. So none of us really know what the fall and the winter is going to be like. We're going to have a relapse like we did the last couple of years, or it's going to go forward smoothly. So I think having flexibility in the near term, as much as in-person is great, might be good for some people.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd like to piggyback on that. So I think the only thing that has changed about the COVID situation is people are no longer being very vocal and talking about it with the same frequency. I have the advantage of working with a lot of employees, and the number of employees that are currently out because they are infected and their entire family is infected, and the number of people that I have a number of medical professionals in my family that they're currently treating because of these infections is absolutely through the roof. But people are taking the cue that this is over and everything is fine. So I think that there's a segment of the population who is aware and fully cognizant that they're putting themselves at risk by putting themselves in gatherings, and some of them are bringing back infections, and these school gatherings are now bringing them home to unsuspecting families. And so for those people who are going to be a lot more conscious and aware that they are putting themselves at risk, yes, they may sit back. And I wasn't going to say that, but that's absolutely why I'm not coming on the 19th. I know what's out there, and I'd rather avoid it if at all possible. And so I limit my vehicles for exposure as much as I can. And if there's an option for me to do that, which virtual provides, then I take that.
Any other comments? I am not sure we need a motion on this. Can we have a consensus that we're going to meet next time with the option of coming in person or participating virtually? I'm not seeing anyone asking for a vote, so.
Did you want to just like even a show of
Yeah.
hands or something that?
Thank you. Let's do that. Show of hands that we agree to meet next time with the option of, we're going to meet in person with the option of joining the meeting virtually. Everyone in favor of that? Okay. I think that was a majority. Thank you, everybody, for that discussion, that frank discussion about this issue. I think we can move back now to our work session and possible future work session topics.
Yes. All right, well, hello, Planning Commission members. As you know, I'm Todd Borkowitz, Associate Planner with the Community Planning Group in Long Range Planning. In this presentation, I'll review the status of work session topics prioritized by the PC back in January of 2021. Many of these topics had a work session presentation given on them, either as part of an ordinance or as a special briefing. The survey asked PC members to prioritize each topic. Next slide, please. So the 2021 survey results identified 7 high priority topics. The work program updates were presented regularly. Middle housing, the transportation system plan, and affordable housing were discussed through ordinances that came before the PC last summer. And then the county's government relations team presented a legislative update in the summer of 2021. Next slide. The survey results identified 6 moderate priority topics. Agricultural characteristics and land uses were discussed through the Rural Omnibus Ordinance that came before the PC last summer. Erin and her team also presented the Urban Reserve Transportation Study in the spring of 2021. Other topics we never got to, but they could be considered in the future. Next slide, please. Low priority topics, as determined by the PC, included the following. Complete streets and short-term rentals were presented in 2021, although we did receive feedback from the PC that some topics not coming before the PC for deliberation did not need to be presented. Next slide, please. And here's a list of topics from the previous slides, not specifically addressed in a work session, along with how they were prioritized by the PC back in 2021. So are these topics of interest to PC members? And if so, what level of priority should they be considered? Next slide, please. So as part of the 2021 survey, individual PC members submitted the following topics for consideration. They include simplifying the land use process, incentives for market rate housing affordability, updating the community development code elements, and opportunities for preserving trees and natural resources. Next slide. In addition to the topics on the 2021 survey, we presented additional work session topics that we believe would be informative to PC members, including the topics presented earlier in this meeting. Next slide. So given that nearly 2 years have passed since the 2021 survey, we've developed the following suggestions for new topics that the PC may want to have presented to them. They include training by the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, information on state-level topics like wildfires and psilocybin that the county might seek or be required to respond to, a legislative update similar to that which the government relations team gave to the board yesterday, updates on possible TSP changes, and updates on the state's climate-friendly and equitable communities rules as that process continues to evolve. Next slide, please. On that, I'll conclude this presentation and welcome the PC's discussion. Thank you.
Is there any commissioner who has a comment or a question? Commissioner Will.
Yeah, can we share the slideshow again and go back to the lists of trainings, the second to the last or third to the last?
Was it that one?
No.
Or the one after
The one
this.
that has all of them, I think.
Oh, no, I was thinking like there's some trainings. Yeah, I think this is it.
Michael, I think it was slide 8.
That is.
Oh yeah, right here.
Yeah. I raised my hand because I thought some of these were good topics. I always think it's good to keep engaged or up to date on updates. So the bottom 3 are areas I'm interested in. That's my comment.
Other comments? My comment is, there's a lot of them to sort through. I think I would need a little more time to think about where my priorities would be. Commissioner Petrillo.
I guess I have a complaint, which is Robert's Rules of Order just seems like I'm offended it's so low in the priority. So that's all.
Commissioner Havner.
I guess I would second Commissioner Petrillo's comment about Robert's Rules of Orders, but since we're virtual, I don't think the rules apply the same way as they used to.
No, they don't.
Oh, and I do have a penchant for wildfire safety measures.
Okay. Right, okay, so that's the second one. All right. Commissioner Bidu.
I also wanted to mention Robert's rules just because Commissioner Petrillo is going to be leaving us pretty soon, and he kind of is the one who leads our way with Robert's rules.
Well, I do want to call out or give a shout out to our county council who is serving. I think he's been very helpful and advisory and accurate about Robert's rules. So I think you're in good hands.
And this is
Commissioner Havner. Commissioner Havner?
Yeah, I apologize. I forgot to turn my hand off.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Chair
No,
Lockwood, this is Rob Ovett. If I could just have a real quick comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
I would kind of second or third the thoughts that have been expressed about Robert's rules, but it may be a little bigger than that in the sense that the rules around public meetings in Oregon are a bit in flux. The legislature has been tinkering with them temporarily for now, and some of those have been made permanent during COVID. So it might actually at some point in time be a good idea just to have a short presentation on current public meetings laws, which are of course supplemented by Robert's Rules of Order.
Thank you.
Chair Lockwood, I have a comment. Since this is a bit potluck conversation, following up on Commissioner Havener's wildfire point, I was reading a statistic. Sorry, my wife was trying to reach me, but she knows I'm in a meeting, so she's gonna have to wait. I was reading an article recently that put Oregon's air quality as one of the lower ones in the country. And my kids were asking me, why in the world would that be the case? And I'm like, well, because of wildfires. That's why. The number of days that we've had poor air quality has been due to wildfires, and it's going to be more and more an issue as we apparently, if we continue to have increasing number of events, wildfire events, which quite honestly, since the 20 years that I've lived in the state, it's increased quite a bit, particularly in the last decade. Areas that have not experienced blackouts or whiteouts because the smoke levels were so high are now experiencing them once or twice or three times a year. It's a public health, it's a public safety issue. So I just want to underscore that.
Any other comments? Do commissioners have ideas about how we could manage this list? Or Mr. Borkowitz, were you looking for this kind of free commentary, or does staff want a more formal, or should we do another survey? What would be the best thing to do?
Well, I would suggest, Michael, if you can go back to slide 5. There you go. The topic's not specifically addressed, and just if these are still topics that are still relevant to the PC, and if so, what are they in terms of priority, and then kind of go from there. What else should be added on? I know a few things were mentioned already, and we'll acknowledge those. Yeah, ideally, it'd be nice to kind of come out of here with to end this conversation with some priority projects or some priority topics.
Okay. For me, the topic, one topic would be, I feel like I still need to know more about affordable housing and how we make that happen in the county. That's the only one that leaps out to me as of greater interest. I mean, they all have value. And I'm good with wildfire. I'd like to know more about that too.
Well, if we think about what is sort of out there in the public discourse of even during election season, I mean, affordable housing is something that we've been talking about, commenting on, besides just even the fact that we were dealing with the middle housing ordinance. It's been a issue of concern, and it's a very challenging one, and it ties in with statewide housing goals. And so I do think it's going, and it's not going to fade away off the top list of priorities for people in our community, because the supply side of the equation is very difficult to address when it's really housing is built by private enterprise, not by public enterprise. And so, not that I'm saying it should be done by public enterprise, but that we can often affect demand side, but it's very hard to affect supply side. Like with the economy right now is in a very unusual state, and with these big increases in interest rates, mortgage rates, the demand goes down, and therefore builders, right now we're still short, X amount of hundreds of units, thousands of units, but builders will be, the building community will be pulling back on building because demand is pulling back, which means that it becomes a vicious cycle going forward. And it's hard to figure out how to crack this nut in the way that we almost should be providing incentives to builders to build in spite of a down market, because we need those units once we get through the slowdown. But all that's to say is it's a complicated issue, and it probably is worthy of the Planning Commission's attention going forward.
Commissioner Badu.
Of course, I'm always going to advocate for more information out there on affordable housing, seeing as I work in affordable housing finance. But I think that even deeper than just the affordable housing with a capital A, it might be worth exploring some different types of housing affordability in options and ideas that are out there right now. And then Secondly, just wanted to add that, you know, being newer on the commission, I think it would be helpful for me personally, and I don't know if others agree with me, so please others chime in if I'm off base here in terms of the general feeling of everyone, but the statewide planning goals I think would be something that would be helpful for me to be able to delve into a little bit more, just outside of what I've personally looked into.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Commissioner Wellner.
Specific to the affordability piece, because a big part of what our work is to review and approve changes to the community development code, maybe looking at what changes we could consider that would have an effect on affordability. And so we could make a decision on whether or not we should go down that path. Things like facade requirements and outdoor yard area requirements and different setback requirements, building height requirements. What are the things that we as a planning commission might want to change that could affect affordability one way or another?
Increase production, yeah.
Yeah.
And if I could interject on this list, the statewide planning goals and the future urban growth boundary expansion and the clear and objective standards, I think will all be things that we will be bringing to the Planning Commission as part of other work that we're doing. So for instance, in the significant natural resources work, the problem that we keep having is about clear and objective standards, and so probably doing a little deeper dive on what exactly does that mean, and how does it work for our code might help with the discussions on significant natural resources. And the statewide planning goals, a lot of the things that we're working on, like Steve mentioned the transportation planning rule, and I'm trying to think of the transportation goal. Is it goal 10? No, that's housing. Anyway, one of the statewide planning goals is transportation. One of them is about housing. One of them is about significant natural resources. So I think as we talk about those topics, we can definitely bring in more information about the statewide planning goals into those discussions. The future urban growth boundary expansion, there is one going on right now. And so that might be a timely thing for us to bring back as a work session. So on this list, those are the things that I see as probably kind of impending things that we could bring back related to work that's going on.
Any other comments? Would you show us that other list again, please, Mr. Borkowitz? Right. What is fair housing training? Can someone explain that?
That's a training that's offered by the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. I know they would have a representative basically come out and present to the PC.
Okay.
I don't know really the details of the training. I don't know, Teresa, could you speak to that at all, or maybe somebody else?
I'm wondering if Commissioner Moribide knows, and if that's why you have your hand up. No, okay. So I know a little bit more than Todd does about that. So fair housing is about anti-discrimination measures in our code, and we have made some changes in our code in the past to address this. And I'm not thinking of the particular words right now related to fair housing, but it is something that we do a fair housing plan at the county. We do need to make sure that our regulations are not discriminatory or and making sure that we are affirmatively furthering fair housing in our regulations. So the training, I think, is good to have as we probably look at any of our code changes, to be thinking about, are we having any of these kind of impacts?
Thank you. Commissioner Bidu.
I just had a question about the history of racism in planning, and if that was a internal presentation or if there's a consultant or anyone that has something put together already.
There's a lot of noise behind you, but I think you asked about the racial discrimination in housing and the history of that, and if that was a staff presentation. Is that right? Okay.
So I think that could either be, it could be part of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon's training. In fact, I'll just read really quickly from their website that the training informs housing consumers and providers about the historic challenges that protected class members have faced and the proactive solutions implemented to overcome them. And having done the Fair Housing Council of Oregon tour that they do too, I would imagine that a lot of issues of racial discrimination in housing will be covered through that. That said, the City of Portland a couple of years ago did a report on a racist planning history in Portland. I know Beaverton's been looking at some historical inequities related to housing and planning that have occurred. And so I think staff could pull together the resources to put together a presentation on that.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I need to raise my hand.
Go right ahead. Yeah, let's just go right ahead.
I just wanted to not clarify, but I guess add on to what Teresa said, which is, although there's the fair housing, although Oregon has its own fair housing issues, really, Oregon's and other states, it's part of a federal mandate or law, really, which is not, it's a landmark piece of legislation, which was the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And Fair Housing Act was part of that legislation, and the objective is, to prohibit discrimination in sales and rentals. It's a very complex part of the law, both federally and locally, and that's why there's so many lawyers involved with it in different states. But it's not just something that's minor. It's like the voting right. It's like the Civil Rights Voting Act or something. I mean, it's a central part of the Civil Rights Act, and might be worthwhile to have a presentation on it. However, keeping in mind that it's more of an enforcement issue at this point, and because we have to meet the federal standards no matter what, or the public does, and communities have to. And while it's good to know, it's not as like we can have much impact on it. It's more of just learning about it and understanding how it works. So.
I might ask also whether there are other things that Planning Commission members are interested in that we haven't included on these lists. And that's not if you don't speak now, you'll never get to speak again. So, I mean, we can always add items, but.
Well, to some extent, I'll never be able to speak again. So, because that's coming up. But is increasing how do we make public participation, how to have effective public participation in what we do. It is goal 1, right? In the statewide planning goal. And we don't always, I mean, not we, but in general, it's hard to make that happen. And it takes a lot of effort, and there's different theories on it, but public participation is an issue, I think, in terms of how to make it happen and make it happen effectively. Because without that, it becomes checkboxing type of public participation. Okay, we did this. We met the code on that. And sometimes people feel like they weren't heard, or that their interests or concerns weren't addressed just because it was done through a checkbox process. So it does take time and it takes resources, as I've learned from talking to like planning professors about what would it mean to have more effective and public participation. They said it would require more resources that most of the counties and jurisdictions don't have. So it's something to keep in mind, particularly considering it's goal 1.
Well, will you be sending us this PowerPoint, maybe, Teresa? So for our, or rather, Todd, for our reference. I mean, I think it's something we can return to, right? And or commissioners can think about and bring up at a later meeting if they have a suggestion on what they'd like to hear more about.
Oh yeah.
But it'd be nice to have the list to refer to.
Yeah, we'll these presentations today will be posted to the website.
Okay. Does anyone have any further comments?
I do, of course.
Yes, go right ahead.
When the transportation, assuming there is a major TSP update, it would be helpful. I would recommend that there be a planning commissioner designated to participate as a full member of that, if there's a advisory or a citizen input group, because it's, transportation and planning, because we're, that's what the department's called, right? Land use and transportation. Keeping in mind that in a lot of jurisdictions, land use and transportation are two separate departments, but it's going to become a big issue because transportation modality is rapidly changing. I think faster than we willing to than our planning is, and so it'd be good to have somebody who's a designee to participate on behalf of the Planning Commission if there is a major TSP update in the near future.
I did that last time, Jeff. We had one last time.
Right. I think it'd be good practice. And as I recall, I think the chair at that time had requested it, that there be a designee, and I think that's a good practice. It's not required. It was a request made to the board.
All right, any more comments? All right. Thank you. I hope that was enough direction. It was.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, the next item on the agenda is consideration of the minutes for July 20th, 2022. Does anybody have corrections of those minutes? All right. I'm not seeing any corrections, and I don't have any corrections. Are there any objections to approving the minutes as submitted? I don't see any objections, so the minutes for July 20th, 2022 are approved as submitted. We've already had our discussion on hybrid PC meetings, so we'll move to, oh, sorry, I should back up a little bit. Are there any other Planning Commission communications this afternoon? I don't see any.
Well, no, I do. I'm sorry, of course.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question for staff. And so I'm trying to find my Zoom screen here, but With the with Aaron serving, I missed the first couple minutes of meeting, I think, and I read the information that you wrote out. You're serving as interim, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that there's a process going for either hiring or appointing somebody on a permanent
Correct.
basis. And you know, you've done a lot of important work, valuable work at the transportation level. And this is this interim position obviously takes you away from that. How is that void going to be filled? I mean, I'm considering the primacy of our transportation planning.
Well, I think that's a good question. I've been working a lot for the past couple of weeks doing two roles. I'm still principal transportation planner as well. I expect that the permanent planning and development services manager will be announced sometime in the next few weeks as the hiring process concludes. If there is a vacancy for the principal transportation planner, then we would go through a recruitment to fill that position. And so you're correct that we have a bit of a staffing shortage. It's actually not unique to our transportation team. We have a lot of staffing shortages in various work groups here. I think we're still doing a pretty good job getting our work done, but certainly something that we'll be looking to make sure that we have all the staff we need on board to move forward these important projects.
So it's just, I'll underscore how important it is, you know, losing you at the transportation and assuming, I mean, interims can last a period of time in public sector just because it's a public appointment process. Recruitment's hard, of course, in the job market we have. So if it continues for a long period or beyond what might be originally anticipated, it might be worthwhile to, I guess underscoring the importance of making hiring a priority for a functional area that is, you know, probably one of the biggest, the most, the one that has the most budget impact and is really, you know, just so important right now and will continue to be, particularly as our traffic issues become more difficult to solve or confounding. So, you know, good, and thank you for serving in this position. I also wanted to express that and just hope that folks we can fill in what you've left behind. So.
Well, thank you. It's been interesting. I've learned quite a bit.
Any other comments from commissioners? Communications. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so are there any objections to adjourning at this point? Seeing none, but we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.